Hello, friends, and welcome back to Malicious Compliance Stories. But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe with the turned-on bell so you don't miss the new video every single day. Here we go. Are you open? We're clearly not. This happened to me about a week ago. A bit of context for the store I work at. When we're closed, there are metal shutters that cover all the doors and windows. To get into the building to open in the mornings, we open the shutters for the exit door, which has no handle on the outside, which is fine since it's an exit door. We open at 9 a.m. This fateful day, I'm on the opening shift, so I'm hanging out with my manager in the office before we open the shutters, when at 8:57 a.m., I remember that specifically, we hear the buzzer that goes off whenever someone opens either the entrance or the exit door. My manager and I look at each other because neither of us are expecting anyone else to be there yet. Then a man comes into the store. Now remember, every other shutter is closed and the exit door has no handle on the outside, meaning he literally had to pry his way into the store. As he walks in, he shouts, "Hello!" I step out of the office, look at him, and say, "Hi." He then asks, "Are you guys open yet?" It took me a moment to be able to respond, wondering how he could possibly think we're open, but then tell him not for a few more minutes. He says okay and walks back out. He came back in through the entrance door this time as soon as we were open and bought his stuff. When he left, he forgot his phone on the counter, so he came back a few minutes later and came in through the exit door again, despite having already gone through the entrance door once already. Worst part is, what do they expect? The lights are off, half the shelves are empty, and no one's going to ring your items. So what do they think they'll gain? And our second story. Nephew of the corporation owner. I worked as a process engineer at a small metalworking plant about a 45-minute drive from Chicago. It was the late 80s. The Illinois air smelled like gasoline and cheap diner coffee, the radio spun "Take on Me," and our night watchman caught Cubs games on AM. Some nights they soared, some nights they fell into the ditch. We turned shafts and gearbox housings, ran short batches for local combine makers, and had one contract for pump station assemblies. The owner, Henry Fetterman, was one of those old-school businessmen who knew what cash felt like in sweaty palms and how a register sounds when you've earned it. Then Henry got divorced. People said he'd long suspected his son wasn't his, but he had no proof. The split was loud. Lawyers, newspapers, and whispers all over our little town. Henry made a move that shocked everyone. Just to spite the ex, as he said in the smoking area, he put his nephew Jeffrey in as executive director. Succession, family, blood's blood, he told us, and that was supposed to be that. The first 2 years passed without catastrophe. Henry was in the shops almost every day, worn leather jacket, sniffing the cutting oil, tapping lathe chucks, stopping at my drafting table to ask, "What's the clearance on that spindle pair?" Jeffrey kept quiet at first. He wore expensive sneakers, smelled like aftershave, and loved motivational lines he'd lifted from magazines. But he didn't get in the way. Henry still had a hand on the pulse, nephew walking beside him, learning, or so we thought. Then a blonde showed up at the plant, 20-plus years younger than Henry. Her name was Lori, and her laugh rattled the fluorescence above accounting. Some whispered it was the nephew's doing, that Jeffrey introduced Henry to models so Uncle could relax and stop hovering. I didn't know if that was true, but within 6 months, Henry took his first real vacation in all my years there, a full round-the-world trip. He left us feeling like someone had pulled the main drive shaft out of the shop and said, "Spin however you like." Jeffrey stretched his shoulders. Things started to slide, slowly. First the small stuff. They bought the wrong fuel for the Ford forklifts, cheaper substitute, and 2 carburetors died inside a month. Then expensive carbide inserts started disappearing from the tool crib. The storekeeper swore he'd issued them per paperwork to guys I'd never even seen. Orders were pushed out because the suppliers delayed. New vendors appeared with funny names, Midwest Prime Supplies, Lakefront Metals, that turned out to share the same broom closet above a car wash in DeKalb. The foreman started sounding the alarm. Stanislaw, our mechanical shop chief, an old Pole with a red face, walked into my office shaking a stack of reject reports. "Look at this," he said. "What steel is this supposed to be? This cert says AISI 4140, but it machines like Play-Doh. Tools are burning up, the lot's scrap. I can't do this." He went to Jeffrey. He sat in Henry's office, new push-button phone on the desk, and a silver Perrier bottle he sipped like medicine. "We need a lab test and to return the material to the supplier," I said. He smiled without looking up, spinning a cassette in his Sony desk player while Michael Jackson rasped through the tiny speakers. "No," he said, "logistics cost more than the loss. It's within tolerance. Keep working." "That's not tolerance," I said. "That's junk. And the pump and drive order has to go on time. They'll bury us in penalties." He finally looked up, and I saw something new. Cold, detached curiosity. "You're an engineer, right? So solve engineering problems. I solve business. Business says no noise. All questions go through me. Henry's on vacation." That evening, I called Henry. Lori's cheerful voice answered on their home machine. "Henry's recharging somewhere between Havana and the Caymans. If you're a supplier, leave a message. If you're an employee, talk to Jeffrey." Then the beep. I hung up as carefully as if the handset were glass. Week by week, the burn got darker, like a saw slowly scorching. Veterans got pressure. Apparently they were toxic, sabotaging change. A few were fired, Eddie among them, a miller who could eyeball a burr radius. In came Jeffrey's buddies, guys in matching leather jackets who knew more about horse racing and bookies than about fits and tolerances. They stocked the floor shop like it was their bar, looked down their noses at the crew, and huddled to whisper by my drawing board. "Hey, engineer," one of them, white guy with a wannabe Rambo vibe, drawled. "How's our super tolerances? Don't hold up our bonus." "Your bonuses don't seem tied to accuracy," I said, and walked away. I had a choice, close my eyes or start counting. I chose counting. The 80s were paper, carbon copies, and Polaroids. I bought a little micro cassette recorder and a pack of MC60 tapes at Sears, borrowed an old Canon from an accountant friend, and arranged with Stanislaw and our storekeeper, Joe, to make duplicates of every slip. I wasn't stealing documents, I was copying them. I dated everything, noted time, shift, witnesses. I built a map. The scheme surfaced little by little, like a ship coming out of fog. The new suppliers padded prices and short-shipped, then backfilled with adjustment slips approved by production. Jeffrey's guys signed those. Meanwhile, excess scrap was written off and somehow rolled out of the yard at night in one buddy's pickup, only to show up at a scrap yard in Evanston a couple days later. Add to that a consulting outfit called Sheridan and Company, with one phone sitting in Jeffrey's aunt's kitchen. I built a matrix on graph paper, supplier, invoice, date, actual received, variance, who signed, where it went. Next to it, tapes of conversations, photos of trucks and plates I snapped at dusk with the Polaroid, and copies of the scrapyard checks that a friend at the yard let me see. I needed one more nail, a direct link proving it wasn't supplier error, but kickbacks. It fell into my lap. One night I ducked into a new corner bar where Top Gun played on a TV with no sound and heard Jeffrey's voice in the restroom. He was on the payphone, stall door open, that kind of guy, saying, "No, listen," he laughed. "You just add 5% and that 5 comes back to Sheridan, like we agreed. Uncle's in Panama, cocoa or rum, I don't know. We've got our own deck here." I stared at the city mirror, listening to him negotiate retro bonuses for the quarter. I walked outside, reached into my briefcase for the recorder, and quietly cursed myself for not hitting record on the way in. Still, I had enough. The new toughs in the shop sensed something. I started getting random checks at the gate. Someone rifled my file shelf. I kept master copies at home and only carried what I needed. Then one Monday, I got called upstairs. Henry's office smelled like somebody else's cologne. Jeffrey sat in Henry's chair, ankle crossed over knee. 2 of his new managers flanked him. On the desk lay my time card, placed there for effect. "Sit," he said without offering. I sat. "You're a great specialist," he began in full infomercial tone, "but you're, too deep in paperwork. Business isn't just numbers, it's vision. I can offer you a 50-cent raise and a yearly bonus, on condition you don't—" He paused, raised his brows, smiled. "Hold up the process with your audits. All questions through me, documents through me, no recordings, clean hands, clean floor, clean minds." "You're offering me money for silence," I said. "I'm offering you an adult deal," he leaned in. "Don't be a child. This is how everyone works. You wouldn't want," he nodded at my briefcase, "anyone thinking you carry things out past the door. We have a security policy." I felt sick. His voice poured like cheap syrup, playing big boss in his 20s in a white shirt someone else ironed. I stood. If you want to fire me, do it now. But know this, I documented everything, and if the plant goes down, I won't go with it. He laughed. Oh, don't worry, you're already fired. Failure to perform duties. And yes, he tapped a paper. Sign here, or we'll find what you took. I didn't sign. I grabbed my coat, 2 broken pencils from the desk for the memory, and left. At the door, Homer, the old guard, just tipped his head. Hang in there, kid. At home, I spread my whole map across the kitchen table. My wife set down a cup of coffee, looked at the columns of numbers, and said, either court or the paper. Better yet, both. I chose a third option. On credit from a lawyer friend, I bought an hour of guidance. Investors. Henry had a loan for shop expansion and a quiet little group of private lenders in Chicago who liked steady interest. The only thing they didn't like was being played. I found them through a former classmate at a bank in Naperville and set a meeting. On the way, in a roadside diner, I dropped a coin in a payphone and dialed Barry's machine again. Lori chirped the same line. I hung up and smiled. Sometimes silence says more than words. The investors were a mix of expensive watches and cold eyes. I laid out the map, ghost suppliers, price padding, junk steel, midnight pickups, tapes with voices arranging 5 here, 5 back. I didn't ask for money. I wanted them to see how their reality was getting written off as tolerance. You understand, one of them said, a man with gray at the temples and a hawk's nose. This is criminal. I do, I said, and I understand schemes like this don't run without cover. I don't know if Mr. Fetterman is in on it, but his signature hasn't been showing up lately. That evening, men in suits showed up at the plant. Jeffrey's guys took them for auditors. They were auditors, but not the kind who just check boxes. A week later, other men arrived with subpoenas. Then came the attorneys. They seized the books and accounting and the slips in the crib. The scrapyard agreed to cooperate. Rambo Light flipped first, spilling everything about the consulting, the splitting, the kickbacks. They rolled him fast. The IRS got interested in Sheridan and Company's checks. Henry came back at the perfect dramatic moment, like a scene from a noir. Plane lands, palm prints on the push-button phone, and there's a seizure notice on the plant gates. He walked the shop, running his hands along the iron beds, anger and shame mixed in his eyes. When he pushed open his office door, Jeffrey wasn't in his chair. A man from the DA's office was. Mr. Fetterman, the prosecutor said, "You'll want to sit." Jeffrey tried to slip the noose. He screamed, "Conspiracy! The old guard set me up." He accused me of stealing documents, waved my fired for cause slip like a magic wand. But tapes, slips, checks, testimony, those don't evaporate. When they pulled back records for Sheridan and Company, the consulting cash flowed straight into Jeffrey's personal accounts and those 2 partners. The 80s weren't the 21st century. You couldn't hide behind offshore shells with 1 click. The transfers lay there like red threads on white paper. Henry made one right move. He sued his nephew, civil action for damages and forged documents. It wasn't pretty or family, but he was saving what he could. The investors joined. The prosecutor showed the kickback scheme had run more than a year and cost more than our annual revenue. When the verdict came, I sat in the back row and thought how Jeffrey looked in a dark blue blazer, like a kid realizing the game was over. He got time. His buddies got less for cooperating. One drew probation. They were pawns, not architects. Henry saved part of the business, but the asset seizure, reputational damage, and fines did their work. The old metal shop lingered a few more years in a coma before a bigger outfit from Joliet swallowed it. Me? I did what I should have done sooner. I gathered those left on the shore, Stanislaw, Eddie, 2 all-round fitters, and Joe from the crib. We rented a cheap old rail-side hangar whose shelves for aircraft parts dated back to the 40s. I bought 2 retired vertical mills at auction, tore them down to the bolts with Stanislaw, and we opened Riverview Precision. I sketched the first logo with a ballpoint and taped it to the door. Our first contract arrived with a driver from Pump and Drive, the same outfit that nearly buried us in penalties. He said, "We hear you still run on heads and hands, not just mouths." We worked the old-fashioned way. No retro bonus vocabulary. I got up early, drove a van with tools and a thermos of cocoa, listened to weather and traffic on I-88. In the 80s, you could still open a business without a computer, live off a Rolodex and 2 file cabinets, and feel happy sniffing the oil paint drying on an open sign. A year in, we bought our first used CNC, the kind with a green screen and monochrome letters flickering like fireflies. 2 years later, we hired 4 more guys. Year 3, we doubled our floor space. Sometimes I saw Henry around town. He'd aged, but stood straight. Once he stopped by our shop, stared a long while at the shine of metal on the benches, and said, "I let a fox into the hen house. You did what had to be done." I'm sorry I didn't pick up the phone. "You were circling the globe," I said. "Around the world trip," he smiled, "is a word you pay for with years. Take care of this place. There's no Sheridan and Company here, and that's a lot." I nodded and poured him coffee from the thermos. He drank and looked out the window where Midwestern weather turned clouds like gears. As for Jeffrey, in small towns, people remember stories like that. He got out early for good behavior, they say, sold Pontiacs at a dealership for a while, tried to slither back into consulting, but the world had changed. Investors grew teeth, reporters got curious, and computers got memory. He popped by our place a couple of times, stood in the doorway watching the machines and the men in blue coveralls. In his eyes, I saw a question he'd probably never answer. When exactly did it break? Maybe when the owner believed life was one long vacation and the business would politely carry his romance. Or maybe when all of us together let the moment pass when we should have said no. Not maybe faster, not it'll work itself out, just no. I sometimes think back to that day in his office, his tone, that adult deal. The 80s taught me something simple. There are deals you're better off climbing out the window to avoid than walking through the door to accept. And there are things worth more than bonuses, like being able to look at your hands at night and not think your fingers are sticky. When we celebrated Riverview Precision's 3rd year, I set an old Polaroid on the table and snapped a photo. Me and the guys. Stanislaw with oil stains on his shirt, Eddie holding the cake, Joe laughing so hard you'd think to catch it on cassette. I pinned that photo above my desk next to a newspaper clipping about local plant assets seized amid fraud probe. That became our coat of arms, a reminder to stop the smell of scorched sauce at the very start. Out in the little towns near Chicago, the 80s ended, but their ghosts lingered. Cassette music, sticky table diners, payphones that droned in your ear like a heavy machine. We outlasted them. No kickbacks, no family coronations, just honest metal on the bench. And when a new client asks why we're so pedantic about material checks, I smile and say, because I've seen what an inflated tolerance can do to a company. There won't be a next time. An owner who crowns a relative to spite someone else ends up spiting himself. A nephew who treats the world like a ladder made of other people's backs turns it into a gallows. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.